Good afternoon. Yeah, the mic works. Awesome. Hey, everybody, how you doing? How's your DevCon? Actually, how many people's first time at DevCon? Awesome, and thanks for coming to my session, too. Perfect. So my name is Matthew Odell. You're here for Building Prototypes, or subtitled, How Showing, Not Telling, Can Improve Your Discovery Process. So as I said, my name is Matthew Odell. Some of you might remember me as a systems engineer or technical marketing manager for FileMaker. I worked for them for about 7 or 8 years. And then I moved away and I did some work for a startup company called Udemy for a few years, and then decided after having our first daughter, Amelia, there, that we wanted to be closer to family. We moved back to Chicago, and since then I've been doing some design work for my own company, Big Buffalo Design, as well as a lot of work for iSolutions and Chris Hippolyte, and they've been really nice to me. But myself, if you don't know me, these days I am mostly a designer doing user experience design for different projects, as well as some project management work. Before that, I was a trainer, training in FileMaker and other technologies. And even before that, I was a developer in both FileMaker and web technologies. But before we really dive in and get started here, we're going to play 2 little games. All right, you ready to play a little game? All right, first one is super simple. I want you guys to picture in your mind this icon, a circle with a line through it. Do you guys all have that in your head? You got that? All right, how many of you saw this icon? A fair number. Okay, how many of you saw an icon that looked closer to this? A few less, but some. And actually, maybe, did some of you see an icon that looked like this? One in the back. Thank you. I got one person. Sweet. Awesome. So now, I used the word circle with a line through it, but to each of us, we probably saw something a little bit different. And what was one thing to one person was something else to someone different. All right, second game. Pretty simple here. We're going to split up into 2 teams. This half of the room, you're team 1. This half of the room, you're team 2. And team 2, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes right now. Don't worry, team 1 is not going to steal any of your stuff, I swear. Team 1, don't steal their stuff, all right? Okay. Team 2, close your eyes. Team 1, I want you to look at this image. Okay, you got that? All right, team 2, you can open your eyes. Team 1, and now it's your turn to close your eyes. And again, team 2, be nice and don't steal team 1's stuff. All right, close your eyes. Team 2, I want you to look at this picture. All right, got it? Okay, team 1, you can open your eyes. Now, here's where the game comes in. I want all of you to picture the icon for a compass. All right, you got that in your head? Now, team 1, I'm going to assume that you pictured this icon. Is that correct, mostly? Nods of hands? Yeah, okay, close enough. But team 2, I'm going to guess you saw an icon that looked closer to this. Is that correct? Right? These are both compasses, but slightly different. Right? Okay, and just for the sake, since you guys had your eyes closed, these were the images that both teams saw, or each team saw. All right? Okay, so today, as I mentioned in my subtitle, we will be talking about this concept of showing, not telling. And that in many cases, even though people are great communicators, the words that we use in many cases can mean different things to different people. What might seem completely normal to one person might be completely insane to another. Also, we come from different backgrounds with different education levels and different hobbies and different things that we're interested in. So for example, if I said the word portal to all of you, you have in your mind what a portal is, because we're all FileMaker developers, or at least most of us are. But if you went to someone that was not in this room, maybe that was here at the hotel but not at this conference, and you said, yeah, we're going to put that portal on a layout, they're going to have no idea what you're talking about, right? Because we have a different level of understanding because of where we're from and what we're interested in. But then also you can use mind tricks and suggestion to potentially get people to think of a word that maybe they wouldn't have thought of otherwise, or a picture that they wouldn't have thought of otherwise with words. So because of this, because sometimes telling doesn't always really show the person what they want to see or what you want them to see, designers really spend a lot of time thinking about how they communicate with their customers. Communication is a big trait in designers. And a lot of designers use tools that are more visual in order to communicate ideas because they know that telling in many cases can be confusing or you might have misunderstandings through it. So communication is a big thing in the design world. Another big thing that's huge in the design world is this idea of experimenting to learn. And that maybe that, having that humbleness and that humility to say, I might not have the right answer to everything. And so to understand what you don't know and understand what your assumptions are and build tests and experiments, and from there learn through those tests and experiments instead of just through interviews and talking to people. Because actually, how many of us have ever talked to someone and they gave you an answer and then you went off of that answer and then you showed them something weeks later and they were like, no, that's completely wrong. And you're like, but you told me. They're like, well, yeah, but misunderstanding, right? So that's why you experiment and show to learn. And this shows up in a lot of different artifacts that designers use, from things like user journey maps, where they're putting together some sort of visual representation to say, this is the flow of a user through your product and how they're feeling as they're moving through the product. Yeah, there are words in there that help color it, but in many cases, it's a visual medium to show them how a user's moving. You also have things like storyboards, where I'm saying, hey, a user wakes up and they pick up their phone and they see a notification and they swipe on the notification and they do their thing and then they get up and they brush their teeth and they move on. And so you're showing them how this person is potentially using something as they're going about their day. And then even the idea of role-playing can come in handy. I mean, many of us or all of us are building software for people in most cases. But in a lot of times, that software that we're using for people, they're actually then talking to their customers while they're looking at your software. And so your software has to be ready for that communication. And so role-playing is a big way to experiment what that communication might be like and learn from that. Right? So these are all different ways that designers use these concepts of communication and experimenting to learn in order to create the right product at the end of the day. Now, we're not going to talk about these three. Instead, we're going to be talking about this idea of prototyping, right? Which is another big one for these two things, about communicating visually and then making sure that you're experimenting and testing and learning from those tests. Now, normally, for any of you who have seen my kind of talks in the past, I've talked at FileMaker or at DevCon a few times, I normally at this point go in and put up a Google definition of what this word means. But this time, I decided I was going to write my own definition. And that definition is, at least for software developers, for this room, I think this is a perfect definition. Something built quickly to test a potential experience. Now, there are a few key phrases in this. And actually, I should say, as part of this next build, I'm going to highlight a specific word. I know I used to work for Andy Lacates, and I swear I didn't steal this from him from his keynote yesterday. I did this on my own. But the first key word here is the word build, or built. I'm actually building something, all right? I'm not just talking to someone. I'm building something physical for them to interact with. The next key word is quickly. The idea here is that whatever you're building, you have to be ready to throw away. You have to be humble and understand that the thing that you're building might be the completely wrong solution for the problem. And so I don't want to waste time by building something that's really nice when I know I'm going to throw it away at the end of the day. So making sure I'm spending the least amount of time as possible. And then the last one, and this is, I think, especially important for the room here, at least for a lot of people that I've talked to in the past, is that it's not just building something and showing it to that person, even though that's part of it. It's for testing. I'm going to test that experience. Instead of just demoing it to this person, I'm going to say, hey, this was built for you to try to create a new lead in the system. So I want you to try to create a new lead and see if whatever you built allows them to do that without them having to think about it. And if they can do it easily and click and do all the steps, then you're on the right track. But if they can't, then you need to go back and do something differently. All right? So we're testing something here. So why are we prototyping? Well, because you can create things quicker and you're creating a lot of different ideas, you can generate a lot of ideas. And normally, the more ideas you have, at the end of the day, the idea that you settle on will be the strongest one that you possibly can have. And so if you get as many as possible, you'll end up with a better idea at the end. Also, because we're building and testing really early in the process, you're catching mistakes that might have been caught at the very end of your development earlier. and which saves you time, which saves you money, which saves you clients at the end of the day, where maybe you might lose them because you get to the end and there was a massive misunderstanding. So that's why we prototype. So for the rest of the talk today, I kind of have two sections. The first section is about talking about the different tools that are available to us to prototype. And the second section is going to be talking about how we actually do this prototyping process, all right? So this is the first section where we're talking about what are the different tools, and I've kind of bucketed them into three areas. One is paper or sketching type prototypes. The second is using design tools. There are a lot of different design tools out there that allow you to build prototypes. And then the third one is doing actual coding or development in order to build your prototypes, right? And all three have their own pros and cons and strengths and have different purposes of why you would use them. So let's start with the first one, paper, all right? Paper is great because it allows you to get as many ideas out as possible. It is really easy to sketch something out and throw it to the side and then sketch something new, right? You can sketch a lot of different ideas. That's the goal of using paper, is to get a lot of different ideas. And because you can sketch things really quickly, you can also rapidly test new ideas really quickly. You don't have to go back to your computer and do a bunch of things and push a lot of pixels. I can easily sketch a new thing out on a piece of paper and say, is this more like what you were expecting? So there are a lot of different tools that are available to us. Obviously, the obvious ones here, paper, Post-its, cardboard, all different types of paper that I can use to draw on, and then things like markers and pens that I'm drawing on. But there are some other interesting things that you can do as well, like use transparencies. Like maybe as I'm doing a test, I want to have somebody write on this, but I don't want them to actually write on the prototype because I need to test it with 3 other people. Put a transparency on top, have them write on top of the transparency. And also you could use things like scissors and glue sticks. If maybe I have a pop-up menu or something, I want to cut out a little piece of paper that's just your pop-up menu and throw that down when the person taps on it with their finger. So there are a lot of interesting, cool things that you can do with a paper prototype. Now the image that you're seeing here, this is my wrist. I was at an Adaptive Path training, and they had as one of the exercises for us to build an Apple Watch app that was going to allow us to, it was going to be used at a digital nightclub, that people were going to be interacting with other people at the nightclub, but using their watch for different things. And so we came up with a prototype of what it would be like to order a drink for someone else at the bar. And unfortunately, I offered a drink to Lucy, and she did not accept my drink. She did not like it, and so I got a notification back saying that she didn't like it. But how did we build this prototype? Well, we used we used pipe cleaners to tie something to my wrist so that it actually sat like a watch. We also used it around the edges there to kind of have a border to it. And then the interface was really just Post-it notes that were pasted on top of each other. And then as someone tapped on the screen, we peeled the Post-it note off. And then they read the next thing, they tapped on the next screen, and we pulled the Post-it note off, right? Very simple prototype to kind of test. This is an idea. Is this kind of what we're going for? All right? But this is a great way to use paper. When you're doing testing with paper, though, at the end of the day, most of the times you have to do testing in person, right? Because it's paper, it's a physical thing. You got to do it in person. Now, I have the asterisks up there because there are some interesting tools out there. One of them, I think it's called Pop, that allows you to actually take pictures or take images, and then on those images, draw a rectangle to say, this rectangle, if someone taps on this part of the image, take them to this other image. And so you might have a bunch of different pieces of paper, you take pictures of it with your camera, you draw some squares, and you say, if they tap on this area of that piece of paper, take them to this other piece of paper, and you can do that digitally. But most of the time, obviously, we're doing this in person. And you, as the person that's facilitating the test, are the computer. As the person's tapping, you're the one throwing down the new pieces of paper, right? Now, I have this little icon that comes up every time I want to show you guys something outside of Keynote. So I'm going to pop out of Keynote here. And I'm going to show you a little video. See, let's take this full screen so you guys can see this better. This is a video of a paper prototype that someone was doing for a children's website. This wasn't me, I found this on YouTube. But as part of the children's website, they put down a piece of paper. They have a child there, a 7-year-old girl, and they've told her, hey, when you're going to click around, you're going to use a little marker. And they ask her, what do you think of the website? She's like, oh, I kind of like it. I really like the worm. The worm's kind of fun. They asked, what can you do on this page? And she points out all these buttons over here, but completely forgets about the call to action over there. So they're like, oh, we need to design that differently so that they know that's something that they can click on. And then he says, remember, we want to go to a coloring page. What would you do if you wanted to go and color something? And so he just waits and says, how would you go and do that? And she uses the pen and says, I would tap here. He's like, all right, perfectly. When you tap there, then this is what happens. And then he brings in the next piece of paper. And then he asks, is that what you expect? Is that what you would have expected? She says yes. He says, all right, great. Now where would you go, right? And it moves on from there. But this is how you do the testing with paper prototypes. Okay, we'll exit full screen, come back here. So the pros of using paper. Obviously, it's fast, it's cheap, and it's easy, right? I just need some markers. I need a ream of paper, and I can start drawing and sketching out ideas really quickly and generate a lot of different ideas. It's super quick to change. So actually, while you're in the middle of a test, if you put something down and the person's like, that's not really what I expected, then you could say like, oh, what did you expect? And talk to them, maybe have them sketch out what they expected, or then you can sketch out, well, maybe something like this. You can generate ideas and test really quickly. It's very collaborative, which is fun because you get a lot of people together. And again, the best way to generate a lot of ideas is to have a lot of different people with different ideas, so you can be very collaborative with it. There are some cons, one of them being it's really difficult for distributed teams because I have a piece of paper and someone that's in Milwaukee can't really see that piece of paper that I'm drawing on, and so it's really difficult to use it for distributed teams. I mean, when I work for iSolutions, I'm in Chicago, the next closest person is Milwaukee. None of my clients are in Chicago, one's in California, one's in Denver, and one's somewhere else. It's like they're all over the place. So paper is a little bit tougher for this, but I still do it for certain things. It is missing certain interactions, so you're not going to be able to test everything here. They don't actually have a keyboard, right? So I can't actually type into this. I'm either writing or something, so I don't have that interaction. And other types of interactions just don't really exist with paper. So you're having to fake a lot of things in order for it to you to get the right information. But you also might not get all of the information you need from testing because they're just seeing it on paper. And in order to create it, you do need some imagination and confidence that you can sketch. And I will say, I'll give you a little hint, there is a little bit of a Tony Robbins area later where I try to talk you guys up to say that you can sketch, but we'll save that for a little bit later. All right, next, that's paper. Next is design tools. And there are a lot of design tools out there. A lot of design tools. How many of you have used Balsamiq before? I know that's really popular in the FileMaker community. A lot of people like Balsamiq. As I said, I worked at a startup for a bit. Sketch is super popular these days, especially for mobile development in the startup world or in the San Francisco world. I've been using Adobe XD a lot recently. XD stands for Experience Designer. The reason I use it is because it comes with Creative Cloud, and I have Creative Cloud. So I don't have to pay for anything. It's perfect. Or I already pay for it, so I might as well use it. And we've been playing around with that. And there are other ones. Marvel's a web-based one. I was talking about Pop a little bit earlier. And actually, if you don't have any of these, you can actually use Keynote or PowerPoint to actually build some of your prototypes. You know who really loves using Keynote for prototypes? Apple. Do you ever wonder why the animations you see on all the apps you use on Apple are the same animations that you see in Keynote? Because they use Keynote for prototyping. That's why. They love it. All right? Actually, there was a WWDC talk about that, about how they use Keynote for prototyping. It's really cool. So the question here is about that one of the problems with Balsamiq is that the elements that they allow you to put on their layouts or on their prototypes aren't exactly FileMaker objects. They're kind of like FileMaker objects, but not exactly, and so you kind of have to fudge some things. So I know Balsamiq, it is its own company, and so it's really hard to get new objects added. A lot of the other ones, like Sketch and Adobe XD, I'll show you actually XD in a second, where the tools on it are super simple, which then allows you to create templates on top of that, of like, this is what a field object looks like, and then you can reuse those templates. But I'll show you that in a second, and I'll try to answer your question a little bit more. But yeah, that is some of the problems with some of these, is that you're kind of locked into the tools that they have available to you. So the pros of design tools is it's still faster than doing actual development if you know the tool. Obviously, the first time you're going to use the tool, it will be slower. But as long as you start to use the tool and understand the tool, it's a lot faster than doing actual development. As I said, you do have the use of templates. A lot of these come with templates. Now, I will say, as I said, I'm using Adobe XD right now. And Adobe XD has a ton of templates, but none of them are FileMaker templates. And so I kind of had to create my own FileMaker template. It's not great. Maybe someday I'll share it. It's not ready to be shared now. But it's good enough for me to get started to be like, these are what fields look like, and this is what a portal looks like, and this is what a list view looks like, and I can copy those pretty easily and use that as a starting point. Once you have that, it's open to you. So you got to do a little upfront work, but then you're golden going there forward. You also have the ability to test right on the device, which is super awesome. Again, there's no kind of not sure what you're looking at because it's in a piece of paper, but the person's using an iPhone or they're using their computer and they're testing right there on the device, which is pretty awesome. And because these are all computer-based, they're a lot better for distributed teams, right? Obviously with Adobe, they have Creative Cloud, so they have cloud sharing. You can use Dropbox and move files between people and test on different devices. And I'll show you a really cool thing with Adobe XD about how to do potential tests with other people that actually don't have XD installed. But there are some cons. Still slower than paper, right? It's still slower. I can't get as many ideas out as I could with a piece of paper. You are still missing certain interactions. And actually, I think this is super important for our community as a FileMaker community because a lot of these were built for people that are building websites. And most websites aren't data entry heavy, right? They have some forms every now and again, but filling out a form or filling out information is not a big thing of most websites, right? But for FileMaker apps, data entry is huge, right? There's a lot of data entry that goes into it. And these things don't really allow data entry. It's not an actual field you're seeing, it's a box that looks like a field, right? So it's a little bit tougher to test those kind of things with these kind of design tools. And if you make it look really nice, how many of us have had the issue with the client when you show them something that looks really nice and they're like, oh, it's done, right? No, nowhere close to being done. So you have to have that conversation and set some expectations with your customer, but that's a potential con of design tools. So as I said, that little icon's up there. That means I'm going to show you guys something. So here is Adobe XD. This is actually an internal project that I was working on for iSolutions. They're what they call their iTools. It's for lead management and estimation and project management and all that kind of stuff. And so I was creating this, and as I scroll in here, you'll see there's a bunch of different screens. You have different screens that you create. And then on those screens, if I zoom in here, you'll see the tools that I have available to me are super simple. I have a rectangle, I have a circle, I have a line, I have a thing I can draw on, and I have text. And so you're building everything with those shapes and text, and that's it. That's how you build it. And obviously you can format it and give it different colors and give it rounded corners, but they're really all rectangles, squares, or rectangles, triangle, or circles, and lines and text, right? So everything here is built with just those individual things. Now, one of the cool things, actually, so as I said, FileMaker, they don't have a FileMaker template. I might be building one at some point, but they do have other templates. This is actually a template that comes under their file menu. They have this thing, Open UI Kit, and they have an Apple iOS UI Kit. And so here are a bunch of screens, again, using those same things. Actually, I should mention, you can also put images on there. Obviously, it's not a tool there, but you can put images on, or icons. And so they've created all of these screens to be like, hey, if you're going to build something for iOS, here's a good starting point. It has all of the interactions that you would see in iOS. Right. Now, the real cool thing with, or the few cool things here with Adobe XD, and some of these other ones have these same kind of features, is that what you can do is you can say, hey, if the person taps or clicks on this part of my screen, then take them to this other screen. And then while they're on that other screen, if they click or tap on any of these parts of the screen, take them to these other screens that I've built. So as you start to build up the screens, you just have to say, tap here goes here, a tap here goes here, and you start to draw these lines between different things. And then what that gives you at the end of the day is something that you can play and say, like, all right, now I want you to go and try to navigate to a project. All right, I'm going to click on projects, or I'm already on projects, and then I click on this, and it takes me over to the project. All right, great. Now I want you to go and try to create an estimate. Well, I'd click on estimate, and then I'd click create new estimate, create new this, and blah, blah, blah. And you can move through it and watch them move through the app, which is really nice. And they also have versions for iPad and iPhone, so that if you build something that's the screen size of an iPhone, you can actually do the test on an iPhone and have them tap around and have them move around. And then lastly, the other cool thing, as I said, because this is cloud-based, is that they actually have the ability to, am I zoomed all the way out here? Yeah. They have this ability to actually create a link. And then you can send this link to someone, and they'll open it up in a browser, and it gives them a little browser-based version of this that they can click through and navigate through, which is pretty cool. So these are the different kind of tools that are available to this that really make this a nice way to draw things really quickly, put things together, and then link them together, your different drawings, and then have people test. You can do tests with it. So that is our design tools. Next is development, using actual development to build prototypes. In this case, obviously, the tools we're talking about are, well, for us, in most cases, it's FileMaker, or maybe things like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript if we're building a website. And obviously, you can throw up a larger list here. If I'm doing Xcode, if I'm doing C#, if I'm doing Java or whatever, you can use those tools, obviously. But in this case, we're talking FileMaker, mostly. So there are some pros with this. We do have full interactions. So in paper, again, we talked about I can't really type, but I can kind of fake it with like a pen and a transparency. And I don't really have data entry in Adobe XD or some of these other ones. But if I'm in FileMaker, I can have people actually enter data, right? I can put a field on a layout and have them use it. Also, you're testing in the actual software. So the experience that the person has while they're testing the interaction that you've built is in the actual software. So it looks as close to the final product as possible. But there are some cons, as we can imagine. This takes the longest, right? Because I'm actually in FileMaker building layouts and building other pieces. It takes a little bit longer. Then you have this fun question of, when I build a prototype in the actual tool that I'm going to be building the final thing in, is the thing I'm building right now production code, or is it something that I'm going to throw away? And how much time do I spend to make it close to production code if, again, I know it's a prototype, and at any point in time, a prototype might have to be thrown away, right? So how do I deal with that? You have that question that lingers in a lot of cases. And then this conversation that we talked about for design tools is even more apparent here. How final is this? Because if you give them something and it's already in FileMaker, and they know you're building something in FileMaker, they're going to think it's done. So you got to set some expectations there. All right. So those are the different types of prototypes that you can build. Those are the different tools that are available to you. I got paper. And actually, I didn't even mention as part of paper. You can also use whiteboards, right? Whiteboards work really well, except for they're not as permanent, right? Unless you use a permanent marker, and then they're a little bit more permanent. But no one's going to like you. Actually, here's the tip. If no one knows this, I've told this to a few people. If you didn't get anything from my session, you got this. If someone draws on a whiteboard with a permanent marker, you know how you erase it? Draw over it with a dry erase marker, and it erases the permanent marker. There's your tip for the day. Try it next time. Go up and put a Sharpie on a marker, and then, or on a whiteboard, and then go up with a dry erase marker, and it just erases it. Anyway, there's your tip for the day. But you can use whiteboards also. There's design tools, and then lastly, development tools. So those are the types. So next, we're going to focus on the how. Now that I know that these are all available to me, how should I use them? When should I use them? All of those kind of questions. So in order to answer these, I'm going to go through the 8 principles of prototyping. And I should be honest, I didn't create these 8 principles. You'll see some little text down at the bottom here. This is actually 8 principles from this book entitled Prototyping by Todd Warfel. It's an amazing book. I highly recommend getting it. It's on the Apple iBook store. But these are the 8 prototypes that he lines out in his book about prototyping. So the first one, prototype early and prototype often. In a lot of cases, people think of prototypes, or a lot of people think of a prototype, they think of wireframes. And they think it's just one deliverable. I create these wireframes or this prototype, and then I'm done with it, and then that's it. But that's not really what prototyping is, or at least the prototyping I'm talking about. So how many of us have a development process that looks somewhat like this, kind of close to this, where I do some discovery, I maybe come up with some ideas with ideation, I validate my ideas, and then at some point around here, I have some sort of set of deliverables like a requirement stock or an SOW, and then after that, I get into development and launching. Something close to that, we all kind of nod our heads, right? Something similar, right? So when do you prototype in this process? Throughout the whole thing, the whole time. So what does that mean? At the beginning, I might just be sketching around with some ideas, and then at the end, I'm coming up with more full-featured prototypes, and I'm increasing the fidelity of the prototypes along the way. How many of us have heard of the phrase, actually, most of us have heard, if you were at the keynote, because again, Andy talked about this and he stole it from me. How many of us have heard of the idea of the cone of uncertainty? Where at like the beginning of a project, I don't know a lot of stuff. And then as the project goes along, I know more and more stuff, and the stuff I don't know becomes less and less and less, right? So at the beginning of the project, you don't know a lot. And so building prototypes that take a lot of time, you don't want to do that. But as you get further down, when the stuff you don't know is a lot less, you can spend more time on prototyping because there's a less of a chance that you have to throw away everything you're doing, right? But at the beginning, you might have to throw away a lot of different stuff. Now, of course, we all know projects don't really end at launch. We normally have some sort of maintenance cycle that happens at the end, right? Where, hey, we really want this new feature. All right, great. So you'll see this kind of loop. This is a great place for prototyping too. Here's a new feature. All right, great. Build the minimal thing to see, like, is this kind of close to the feature you want? Yeah, that looks great. All right, now let me make it more solid and build in the error checking and all that other stuff. So you get this nice looping there in the maintenance piece. So what are the different tools that you use as you move through these processes? Well, when you're in the discover phase, sketching is great because again, you have to throw away ideas, but you're going to also generate a lot of ideas. And in discovery, you can also be getting a lot of your customers' validation. As they're telling you something, you can sketch something up really quickly and be like this, maybe up on a whiteboard, get up on a whiteboard. And actually, the greatest thing you can do is actually get your customer to get up on the whiteboard themselves and sketch out their own ideas, right? Let them be part of the process as well. So you're sketching because sketching's fast and it's disposable and you can generate ideas from that. Next is Ideate, when you actually really are trying to get as many ideas as possible. And so you're sketching still, whether it's using pieces of paper or whiteboards. But the whole point is to generate ideas, as many ideas as possible, for each of the different interactions. Normally, after you finish the discovery, you have some idea of like, my user has to search for this, and they have to create new leads, and they have to build a new estimate, and they have to do all these things. And so you have that idea of all the things you have to do. Well, start sketching out ideas of like, what is it like to create a new lead? Maybe it's like this. Maybe it should work like this. How about this? How about this? And from there, you get a lot of different ideas. The important thing here is to use a diverse team. I know a lot of us are either like in-house people where we're the only person, or we're lone developers, or we're the only developer that our company has assigned to this project, or we're the only PM that's assigned to this project to do the discovery. But if you can get a diverse team of people, again, you'll get more ideas and you'll get better ideas. Or at least the idea that you'll end up with at the end is going to be the best idea possible because you get a diverse team of people. If you can even get the champion from the customer in on this phase to get them to sketch and generate ideas, that's even better. Again, the idea, get as many ideas as possible. And then once you have all those ideas, do a little bit of critiquing of, well, maybe this, or maybe that, or I didn't think about that. And from there, choose a few of the ones you like. And then also from there, find the unknowns. Find the things that you don't know yet or that you're assuming. Ooh, that brings up an interesting thing. I wonder if they have that information when they're creating a new lead. Maybe they don't have that yet. Maybe they have it later. Now, I could just go and ask the client that, but maybe I can build a prototype to be like, that has that in there and see how they interact with that as part of the prototype. Next, when you're moving into validation, we're moving from paper. We might still be using paper for some of this stuff, but we're probably moving into some of the design tools that are available to us. So figure out, from that, you have this idea of unknowns and assumptions that you're making. Figure out what you need to test about that. How do I test that to get the right information? Choose the right tool. Again, I suggest using the tool that you feel comfortable with of any of those design tools that are available. And then build out each of those little user interactions. This is what it's like to create a new lead. This is what it's like to add a new estimate. And here's what it's like to put hours against an estimate. Then normally at this point, you do have a deliverable. And this is something that I've been changing a bit in how iSolutions does it. They normally have, in the past, as a lot of people have done it, have the big requirements doc. It has everything written in it. And I've been changing it around to say, like, the actual deliverable is this clickable prototype that allows a person to click through. It has all of the different interactions in it. And then from there might be a little supplemental doc that goes along with it that's only 15 or 20 pages instead of 120 pages. Right? And that 15 or 20 pages says things like, hey, when they click that button, it actually sends an email. My prototype doesn't actually send an email, but I want you to know that, and let the developer know that when they click that button, it sends an email. So you have this little supplemental doc that adds little bits of information to help the person understand and also help you document stuff. But the prototype is really the deliverable that you're giving them to say, this is what we're going to build for you. And it's great for two reasons, both one for the customer to see it and be like, this is great, this is exactly what I'm looking for, but it's super helpful also for the developer because they know a lot more of what they're going to build. For the first few projects that I've been doing this on, when I give the developer the prototype at the end, they're like, this is great, I don't have to think about anything anymore, I just have to build it and I'm done, so it's great. Then when you're moving into early dev and maintenance, you might be using your dev tools. You're actually going to be starting to build in FileMaker. But the one thing here is you want to make sure you're focused on usability testing. Right? This is a very important piece, again, this idea of testing when you're building prototypes. And so you want to ask this question of what is the least amount that I can start building in this product to test some of these interactions? And then build your project plan around that. So for example, in a project that I did both the discovery and then the dev on, after I finished the discovery, there were still some unknowns. There were still some things that I was assuming and guessing that weren't obvious in the prototype. And so I went and started to create some of the layouts, and in certain areas, I only spent like half of what the estimate was, or even less than half of what the estimate was. In one example, there was a layout that had a portal of documents in it. And I asked the client, hey, can you drag in, I want you to add a document to this portal. There's one sitting on your desktop, I want you to add it to the portal. And he said, all right, and he goes and he clicks and he drags it and he tries to drop it right in the portal. I had built a nice little like add button at the top that did all of these things, but no, he tried to drag it right into the portal. And I was like, yeah, you would want to do that, wouldn't you? Yeah, I didn't build it that way. I'm like, but you know what, I got time left. You know what, I can build that. I can build that. And I put a container behind the portal, and then they drag it. It looks like it's going into the portal, but it's really going in the container, and then the script trigger fires and blah, blah, blah. But I wouldn't have known that, and if I would have gotten to the end of the project and built it the way I thought it should work, and then he would have been like, that's not how I expected it to work. I'm like, yeah, you're right. You would have expected it to work another way. And so the time I then spent fixed up that stuff, and I ended up with a better product at the end of the day that the customer really liked. So that's the first one, prototype early and prototype often. Second one, understand your audience and what the intent of the prototype is. So these seem pretty obvious, but the idea of audience here, we're talking really about two things. One is personas that you might be creating. Again, another artifact I create when I'm doing discovery is a set of personas or even a set of roles. So just say like, this role does these things. And these are the different interactions that the roles have. And also other information about like what is their technical experience, what devices are they using, how stressed are they as they're trying to do these different jobs, what are the things that really hold them up. That's one. And the other one is what the customer's expectations for the prototypes are. In a lot of cases you're testing, but sometimes you do have to demo for a CEO or a top manager or something. And you're not really doing testing, but you're kind of showing off the work. In that case, showing up with like a stack of papers probably isn't the most professional thing for those people. So if their expectation is something that looks a little bit nicer, you might have to go and build something a little bit nicer. Second is intent. So as I said, when you get nearing the end of the discovery phase, you should have an idea of all of the different interactions that that person is going to have to do in your system. Whether that's, as I said, creating new leads, finding leads, filtering a list, or wanting to get to these leads really quickly, adding projects for a lead, all of those different interactions that they need to do, you should have a list of those things. And then through the other parts of the process, from those interactions, you should also have a list of assumptions. We don't really know. I'm assuming a lot of things when I'm about to build something for a customer. And so I should know what those assumptions are. I should know what I don't know, as much as I can possibly do that. And then from there, that's what I'm going to build my prototypes around, those interactions and those assumptions, because that's what I'm going to test. I want to test those assumptions and be like, am I right or am I wrong? And if I'm right, great. If I'm wrong, what do I have to do differently? All right? So again, I have my fun little icon here. So I'm going to show you guys two artifacts that came from that iTools project that I was talking about before. And one of them was these different personas. So this is the persona of an account manager. The account manager is the person who is creating leads in our system. And so I have in here some of his goals are, main goal is to convert leads to new customers, to spend more time with quality leads and be responsive. And here's some stats on the person, their behaviors and their technology skills and the different relationships that they have with the other people in the system. So I know who this person is. I have an understanding of what I'm building for this person. And then I also have, aside from this, back it up. I have created, oh, I'm offline, refresh to connect. Let's hopefully this will load quickly. This is what is known as a service blueprint, or also it's basically an idea of a journey map that I've created to outline all of the different processes and steps that account managers go through. So if I scroll in here and zoom in here, you'll see an account manager receives a lead from a source, and then the account manager reaches out to the lead, and then the customer calls and talks to the AM, and then moves through this process. So here's my visual way of showing what the process is of a lead moving through our system, and what are those different interaction points with our account managers. And then if I kind of go down to the bottom here, I've also put in what are the different support systems that these people have. So these are the artifacts I'm generating early in my discovery, so I know what are the different steps that the AM has to do, and I have to build for those steps. Those are the different interactions that I'm building for, all right? I also have down here at the bottom like different problems, like that after the initial call, I might not, I want to sell on the initial call if I can. I want to sell a discovery as quickly as possible. So how do I do that? Well, okay, let's see if we can build that into the system somehow. All right, so that is understand your audience and intent. Next one, plan a little bit and prototype the rest. So for planning, you want to take, again, we have all this list of interactions. You want to take one of those interactions. You want to figure out what you want to test about that interaction, and then you want to build something. You want to get into building as quickly as possible. Again, the idea here is that you don't want to waste time. If you're planning a lot of things when you have a lot of stuff you don't know, a lot of those things are just going to be assumptions that might come to bite you later. So just plan a little bit and get building. Get building stuff as quickly as you possibly can. And when you get building, you'll probably go into some sort of prototype cycle like this. You normally start at the top and then go around in a circle, where you start at the top by saying, all right, we're going to prototype this interaction, the idea of creating a new lead. All right, well, with a team, we're going to sketch out some ideas of how we can create a new lead, and we'll present those ideas to each other and critique them. We'll decide which ones we like. So like, all right, this is the one we're going to prototype. Then you prototype it. Then maybe you do another internal kind of review of the prototype to make sure everything's cool. And then from there, you're going to validate your assumptions and unknowns and be like, and do the test with your users and be like, does this do the thing that we expect them to do? And then you learn from that. And then based on what you learn, you start again. If you're wrong, maybe you have to build a completely new thing. If you were right but had to tweak a few things, all right, tweak a few things, right? And then go around again. So this is the cycle. And you keep going through the cycle, improving fidelity, improving other things until you get to the end where you have a finished product. So that's plan a little bit and prototype the rest. You don't want to spend a lot of time planning, because if you do, you're wasting time. Next one, here comes the Tony Robbins area, or the Tony Robbins portion of the speech. You can sketch. All of us can sketch, all right? Now, if we were 6 years old and I asked you if you could draw, you would probably be like, yeah, I'm a damn good drawer, right? But now if I asked you if you can draw, you would say no. Because our expectations are higher because we've watched too many Bob Ross videos, right? He's just too good, right? But it's okay, because these are prototypes. They don't need to be great. They can be crappy. It's fine. And if you are really self-conscious about it, practice for a few minutes. All you have to do is draw some circles, draw some rectangles, draw some lines. Hopefully your text, you can work on it enough so that it's a little bit legible so I can see what you're writing, at least for most of us. You can just work on it and get a little bit better. Now granted, I'm bad at drawing circles, but if I asked you what each of these are, you would probably say they're circles, right? Right? These are my horrible drawings, yes, I will admit. But that's okay. It doesn't need to be perfect. It's a prototype, all right? We can all sketch, all right? So there's the Tony Robbins part of it. You can sketch. All right. Next, and this one goes hand in hand with that. It's a prototype. It's not the Mona Lisa. You don't need to start pixel pushing and making everything very perfect early on, because that's just wasting time. You got to be prepared to take that thing you're drawing and throw it in the trash, all right? Have to be prepared for that. So spend as much time as you think you can to be okay with throwing it into the trash. And also change your mentality so you're ready to throw something in the trash, because you will have to. It's fine to. I have this mantra that I come up with, and I've said it a few times already, and this won't be the last time I say it in this talk, but it's this idea of like, what is the least amount I have to do or build in order to convey my idea and test something? What is the least amount I have to do, because I might have to throw it away? Next, if you can't make it, fake it. And this isn't like, oh, the imposter syndrome kind of thing. It's like, if I can't really physically make this kind of Ajax-y behavior thing, I can fake it. It doesn't have to really be Ajax yet. I'll get to there later. So let's build something that kind of does that. So there's a lot of examples. I've been talking about a few of them already where like, hey, you know what? There isn't really data entry on paper prototypes, but I can put little Post-it notes and have the person draw on the Post-it notes, or use transparencies or other interesting things to fake the concept of it. Or, as I said, if I have a little area where when they click into the search, it brings up a little suggestions of all of the things that they search on. I don't have to really build that, just draw it on a piece of paper. And you can do this in design things too. Actually, one thing I faked that was kind of fun, at least for me it was fun, in this prototype was that, hey, you know what, I built out a bunch of these screens, but the new lead workflow was special because this happened and it took you to a version of a screen that was different from a lot of the other versions of that screen. And so I'm like, all right, well, instead of like making the prototype do that, I just created multiple duplicates that had all these different versions, and then had someone, as they tapped on the screen, go through the flow. And it made a lot more sense. So up here, you'll see I have this version of the project plan that has this new button. Well, that wasn't in another version of it, but I faked it. You just fake it. All right, so that's, if you can't make it, fake it. Next, prototype only what you need. If you don't need something in order to test a certain interaction, don't build that thing yet. You don't need to. I don't need to build every screen in my prototyping, in my design tool, until I need it for my tests, right? Build only the things that you need. So for example, I have all of those different screens that are part of this, but when I'm creating that new customer workflow, yeah, there might be all of these tabs and that button at the top. But you know what? In the flow, they're never really going to those tabs, and that button's there, but it doesn't really go anywhere yet or do anything yet because that's not part of this process. So it's there. They exist there on the tab, but they don't actually do anything. They don't go anywhere. And the nice thing is, because it's a prototype, if someone accidentally clicks on it and says, "What does that do?" You're like, "It's a prototype. It doesn't do anything yet. Right? We're still working on it." So that's prototype, only what you need. Lastly, set expectations. Up until this point, we've been talking about the building of the prototype and the mantras for building prototypes and when to build them. But as I said, at the end of building any sort of prototype, the whole purpose of it is to test it with your clients or with your users. Have them actually test the prototypes you're building. And when you're testing, you want to set expectations. Excuse me one second. You want to set expectations. And there are 3 questions that you can answer for them to set expectations. The first one is, what are they going to see? I mean, how many of us have shown like some sort of early version of something and people start commenting on colors and fonts, but you haven't built in the colors and fonts yet, right? So make sure you're setting those expectations of what this thing is and what they should be caring about, what they should be looking at. What's the scenario that they're in when they're about to do this interaction you're going to give them? And then what is the thing that they need to do? So here's an example of one that I wrote really quickly. I've been talking about this idea of new lead flow, so this is a good example of that. I'm going to be showing you an early paper prototype of the process for creating a new lead. Imagine you've just received an email from an Apple store with some basic information about a new lead. I would like you to try to enter the lead into the system. All right, so the first area was about setting the expectation. It's an early paper prototype. We know it's not anywhere near final. It's about creating a new lead. So I know I'm focused on this idea of creating a new lead. I've talked about imagining that they're getting it from an Apple store because that's something that actually happens. I learned that from Discovery. A lot of the new leads are coming from Apple stores. So then I'm going to have them think about that in their system, and it sets up the scenario in their mind. Oh yeah, okay, I know when that happens. And then I say, I want you to create a new lead. So you want to actually write that script. Have those scripts written out for all of the different interactions that you're going to test with the person. All right, here's what we're going to test. Like, here's a little bit of background about what you're going to see. Here's the scenario. Here's what I want you to do. And then once they do start doing that thing, listen and watch. All right? Sit back, listen, and watch them click through. And maybe ask open questions like, is that what you would have expected? What would you have expected? Oh, what do you think of this layout? What do you think you should be doing on this layout? That kind of stuff. One helpful thing when you're doing these kind of tests is to have two people in the room, or at least a person and a camera. The reason for that is the person that's asking those questions and guiding the person through and telling them and reading the scripts and stuff, because they're thinking about what they're going to say next in a lot of cases, they might miss stuff. So having a second person in the room to actually watch the person that's clicking and moving around is super helpful. And if you don't have that, minimally, like the example above, get a camera or do some screen sharing and some audio where I can actually capture what's happening, right? And this is the most important piece here, and I'm going to say it multiple times. And I know I fall into this category. I do this, unfortunately, myself a lot. Testing is not the same as demoing, all right? The point of this prototype isn't to go in front of the client and be like, and then look, you can click here and do this, and look, you can click here and do this, and look, you can click here and do this. That's not the point of this. The point of this is to say, I want you to do this in my prototype, and then watch them do it. And did they do it? Could they figure out how to do it? Yes or no. If no, why? What do I have to change in order to help them? Do I have to change wording? Do I have to change placement? What do I have to change in order to get it to work and have it intuitive for that person? All right? So testing is not the same as demoing. This is a very important concept. Right? And actually, I should say, there are times where you have to demo. Again, I'll bring up this example of the CEO. The CEO might not use the system, but they might want to see the thing. So you might sometimes have to demo the system through a prototype. That does happen every now and again. But really, the main goal here is to test. All right? So that's the 8th principle here, set expectations. So those are our 8s. Prototype early and often. Be doing it throughout your whole process, gaining fidelity as you move through the process, your dev process. Understand your audience about who you're building for and understand the intent of what you need to test. Then plan a little bit and then get building, get prototyping. Remember, you can sketch. We can all sketch, all right? It's great. We can all sketch. And the reason we can all sketch is because it's a prototype. It's not the Mona Lisa, all right? You have to be ready to throw that thing in the trash. It doesn't have to look great. And if you can't make it, fake it. There are a lot of interesting ways to fake it. I highly suggest going and looking up on YouTube different ways that people have done paper prototypes. Again, that example I had of like, I can't really do this kind of interaction with an Apple Watch, so I'll just put a bunch of Post-it notes and just peel the Post-it notes off. That's a really interesting way of doing it. Prototype only what you need. Again, you don't want to waste time. You want to do this as quickly as possible. And then lastly, as you're testing, set your expectations with your clients of what they're going to see as they are going through your usability tests. So that's my talk. In conclusion here, actually, this is a prototype from IDEO, on one of the IDEO videos where they're talking about a prototype of what it might be like if someone's interacting with a video on an iPhone and they got a person standing behind a cutout screen of an iPhone. So importantly here, show, don't tell. You can communicate your ideas better by visually showing them to someone and having an understanding through that versus through words, because there's always the potential for miscommunication with words. Use the concept of building to learn and experimenting to learn so that you learn through building things and through showing stuff visually instead of learning just by talking. Talking is helpful in certain cases, but you also need to do other things, and building is a helpful way to do that. Be humble in that the ideas that you create might be bad and might not be the right idea. And that's fine, and that's okay, and that's how you'll get to a better idea at the end of your project. All right? And then lastly, when you're testing, test, don't demo, right? You want to watch the person go through the steps, do the things that they need to do, and not demo the thing for those people. So that's my session. There will be updates. I just put up a set of slides up on the community. I think I had a few more changes I might put up a little bit later, but they're mostly there. Please fill out your evaluations. I'd love to hear what you guys think. And also, if you want to, feel free to come up to me and tell me how you thought this went. If you thought it went horribly, that's great too. I'd love to hear that also. But talk to me personally. You can see me around. I'll be walking around. And with that, we will open it up for Q&A. Yeah, so the question here was, can you create objects in Keynote to send people to other slides. And yes, you can. Actually, there's the idea of creating a hyperlink on an object. Like any object in Keynote can have a hyperlink on it. And then that hyperlink gives you the option of going to a website or going to another slide or doing that kind of stuff. And so it's using their hyperlink way to move from one slide to another slide, even if it's not the next slide in order. Yep, great question. That is a great question. The question is, what is the best way to do testing when you are remote from your client? It's a great question. I wish I had a great answer to this, but in this case, it's not as good as being in person, obviously, because you can see their face. But what I've done is do a screen share. And if you use a tool like this where they can open up the prototype themselves, like Adobe XD, they can use the website version of it to click around. So I would send them an Adobe XD link. They can go in and log into that. I would have them share their screen, obviously turn on their audio, and I'd record the session. And so granted, all I see is their screen, I see their mouse, and I hear their voice, and I can't see like painting expression. I mean, if you really wanted to, you can ask them to share their webcam. I mean, a lot of these days, obviously, everybody has a webcam on their laptop. So that is an option, but not all of them would feel comfortable doing that, especially if they know you're recording the session. But a lot of those tools, I use a tool called Blue Jeans. That's a screen sharing tool. It's like $10 a month. It's pretty cheap, a lot cheaper than GoToMeeting. But it allows me to record any of those sessions, and then I have that in my thing that I can go back and watch later. Does that kind of answer your question? Great, perfect. Other questions? Well, thank you guys for your time. I hope you guys enjoyed DevCon. We'll see you in the future.